It all began the day Emma joined our team. She seemed perfect on paper, well-spoken, impeccably dressed, and exceptionally qualified. Yet, there was something about her presence that set me on edge, though I couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was her smile. It seemed sincere, but there was a strange stiffness in the way her lips curved, like it had been practiced too many times in front of a mirror. The first few weeks went by uneventfully. Emma was polite but distant. She had a peculiar way of always knowing what needed to be done, even before tasks were assigned. At first, I thought she was just highly perceptive, but it became unnerving when she completed work I hadn't even started explaining yet. One late evening, as I packed up to leave, I heard faint whispers coming from the break room. It was strange because I was certain everyone else had left. Quietly, I crept closer, holding my breath. The room was dark, but through the sliver of the door, I saw Emma. She was alone, standing in the middle of the room, muttering under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was rhythmic, almost like a chant. The next day, Emma greeted me as if nothing had happened, but her eyes lingered on mine a second too long. I wanted to ask her about the previous night, but something told me it was better not to. Weeks turned into months, and strange things started happening around the office. Files went missing, only to reappear in places no one would logically put them. Computers froze at odd moments, showing cryptic error messages with symbols none of us recognized. Emma, meanwhile, became more integrated into the team, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was always watching. One morning, I arrived early to finish a report. As I passed her desk, I noticed a leather-bound notebook tucked under a pile of papers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The pages were filled with intricate sketches, symbols, spirals, and faces that seemed to stare back at me. My stomach churned as I realized some of the faces resembled people from the office, including mine. Emma's voice startled me. "Looking for something?" she asked, her tone light but her expression cold. I stammered an excuse about misplaced documents and hurried back to my desk, feeling her eyes bore into my back. That night, I dreamt of the sketches. The spirals spun endlessly, pulling me into their depths. The faces whispered my name, their mouths stretching unnaturally wide. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, but the most unsettling part was the faint smear of ink on my hand. It was the same shade as the drawings in Emma's notebook. Over time, my co-workers began acting strangely. Sarah, who had been Emma's closest confidant, stopped speaking to the rest of us altogether. Jason, the office jokester, became withdrawn and paranoid, jumping at the slightest sound. Everyone seemed to be on edge, except Emma, who moved through the chaos with an eerie calm. I decided to dig deeper. One weekend, I stayed late and searched Emma's desk. Hidden in the back of a drawer was another notebook, this one filled with detailed notes about each of us, our habits, fears, and secrets. How did she know these things? The final straw came one evening when I was working late. The office was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Turning my head, I caught a glimpse of Emma standing at the end of the hallway, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. She didn't move, didn't blink. When I called out, she disappeared into the shadows. My heart raced as I packed up my things, deciding I couldn't stay a moment longer. As I reached the elevator, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, and it read, "You shouldn't have looked." The next day, Emma wasn't at work. No one seemed to notice or care, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I heard a faint tapping at my window. I live on the 7th floor. When I mustered the courage to look, there was nothing there but the reflection of my pale, terrified face. Yet, as I turned away, I thought I saw a shadow move behind me just out of reach. I haven't been able to sleep since. Every time I close my eyes, I feel her presence, hear her whispers. I don't know what Emma is or what she wants, but I'm certain she hasn't left. And now, as I type this, I realize my screen has frozen, the same strange symbols from the office flickering across the monitor. I'm no longer alone. There was something unsettling about the way Rachel's desk always looked. Unlike the rest of ours, cluttered with coffee mugs and messy stacks of papers, hers was always pristine. Not a single pen out of place, not a speck of dust. At first, I thought she was just one of those hyper-organized people, but over time, I realized it was more than that. Her desk never seemed to be touched. It was like she didn't actually work there. Rachel had joined our office 3 months ago, and despite being friendly enough, no one seemed to know much about her. She never joined us for drinks after work and rarely talked about her personal life. She always clocked in on time, clocked out exactly at 6 p.m., and worked in perfect silence. It started with small things. I'd hear her humming a strange tune under her breath, one I couldn't place. The melody lingered in my head long after she stopped, like an earworm I couldn't shake. Then, there was the way she stared at people. Her gaze would linger just a second too long, her eyes unblinking, as though she were studying them. One evening, I stayed late to finish a project. The office was nearly empty except for Rachel, who was seated at her desk, typing away. I tried to ignore her, but every so often, I'd glance up and find her staring at me from across the room. Her expression was blank, almost doll-like, and when I met her gaze, she would simply smile, too wide, too perfect. At one point, I got up to grab a coffee. When I returned, there was a sticky note on my desk. It wasn't in my handwriting. It read, "She knows." My stomach churned. I looked around, but the office was completely still. Rachel's back was to me, and she was typing like nothing had happened. I crumpled the note and told myself it was just a prank. The next morning, I overheard a coworker talking to HR. Apparently, Mark from accounting hadn't shown up to work, and no one could reach him. I hadn't noticed Mark was gone, but something about the way Rachel smiled when I passed her that day made me think she had. The disappearances started piling up. Mark was just the first. Then it was Emily from marketing, then Greg from IT. Each time, their desks would be cleared out overnight, as though they had never worked there. The official explanation was that they had all quit unexpectedly, but that didn't make sense. No one just vanishes without saying goodbye. One night, after everyone else had left, I decided to snoop around Rachel's desk. I knew it was risky, but my gut told me I had to. Her drawers were locked, but I managed to pry one open with a letter opener. Inside was a folder, thick with papers. The first page made my blood run cold. It was a list of names, my co-workers. Mark's name was there, crossed out in red. So were Emily's and Greg's. My name was next, circled in black ink. The rest of the folder was worse. There were photos of us, taken without our knowledge. Some were from the office, others from outside, walking to our cars, eating lunch, sitting in our homes. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Then I heard it, the soft creak of a chair. I turned, and Rachel was standing behind me, her face blank. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice calm but ice cold. I froze. My mind raced for an excuse, but she stepped closer, her movements unnaturally smooth. "Curiosity can be dangerous," she whispered, leaning in so close I could feel her breath on my ear. I bolted, leaving the folder behind. The next day, Rachel acted like nothing had happened. But something was different. My co-workers seemed distant, like they were avoiding me. When I tried to talk to Sarah, my closest friend at the office, she just stared at me with a blank expression and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rachel's face, her smile stretching wider and wider until it didn't look human anymore. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of tapping. It was coming from my window. I live on the 10th floor. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. When I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing there, just the empty city skyline. But as I turned back to my bed, I saw it, a sticky note on my pillow. "It's your turn." The next day, Rachel was gone. Her desk was cleared out, just like the others. No one mentioned her, as though she had never existed. But last night, as I was working late, I heard that strange humming again. It came from the empty hallway, echoing softly in the dark. I don't think she's really gone, and I'm terrified I'll find out where she went. Or worse, she'll come back for me. It was a routine Monday when I first noticed something off about Daniel. He wasn't new, he'd been working in the office for over a year. But there was a subtle shift in his behavior that I couldn't quite place. He was quieter than usual, his eyes bloodshot, and he had this peculiar habit of staring at his screen like he was waiting for it to do something. At first, I thought it was just stress. Everyone has bad weeks, right? But then the murmurs started. Not from Daniel himself, but from others. I overheard snippets of conversation. "He's been here all night, and didn't even go home this weekend." The next time I saw him, I tried to make small talk. "Long day?" I asked, leaning on the edge of his cubicle. He looked up at me slowly, his face pale and gaunt. "Time's slipping," he muttered. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned back to his screen, fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. That night, I stayed late to finish a report. The office was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the fluorescent lights. I was about to pack up when I heard it, a low, droning sound coming from Daniel's cubicle. Cautiously, I approached. He was hunched over his desk, staring intently at his monitor. The screen was blank except for a single, blinking cursor. He didn't seem to notice me, even when I called his name. "Daniel," I said louder this time. He flinched, his head snapping toward me. His eyes were wide, filled with something I can only describe as terror. "It's in the system," he whispered. "It's watching us." I backed away, unnerved. "What's in the system?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard as though trying to outrun something. I left soon after, but the image of his panicked face stayed with me. The next morning, Daniel's desk was empty. His monitor was off, and his chair was pushed neatly under the desk. I asked around, but no one knew where he was. HR claimed he had called in sick, but something about the way they avoided eye contact made me think they were lying. That night, I dreamt of his screen. The blinking cursor expanded, swallowing the screen whole until it was nothing but darkness. In the dream, I could hear Daniel's voice, faint and distant. "It's spreading." When I arrived at work the next day, I found a USB drive on my desk. It wasn't mine, and there was no note or explanation. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my computer. There was only one file on it, labeled "Do Not Open." I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. The file contained a single video. It was grainy, as though recorded on an old camera. The video showed Daniel sitting at his desk. He was pale and shaking, his eyes darting around as though he was being watched. He leaned into the camera, his voice a frantic whisper. "If you're seeing this, it's too late. It's in the system. It knows everything. Don't." The video cut out abruptly, replaced by static. Then my screen went black. Panicked, I tried to restart my computer, but it wouldn't turn on. When I looked around, I realized the entire office was silent. No machines were running, no phones ringing. Even the lights seemed dimmer. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping sound like nails on a keyboard. It was coming from Daniel's desk. Slowly, I approached, heart pounding. His monitor was on, displaying a document with a single line of text. "Welcome to the system." Before I could react, the screen changed. It showed the office, but not as it was. The cubicles were empty, the lights flickering. And in the center of the room was a figure, its back to the camera. I recognized the figure immediately. It was me. The feed cut out, and my monitor returned to normal. But when I turned around, the office was empty. Everyone was gone. I haven't seen Daniel since that day, but sometimes, late at night, I hear the tapping sound again. It's faint, almost imperceptible, but I know it's there. And every now and then, my monitor flickers just for a second. But that's all it takes for me to see it. The blinking cursor, waiting for me to type.